In central Washington, a man found a large, mysterious hole on his property that was so deep it doesn't seem to have a bottom. Local residents had been throwing garbage into the hole for generations, but it would never fill up. When the man tried yelling into the hole, there wasn't any echo. Then the man started to notice even stranger things. His radio started picking up radio channels that he'd never heard of before. He found objects lying around the hole that seemed to be from a different place, or from a different time. That's when the man wondered, was this hole a portal into another world, or another dimension? Today, we're gonna talk about what can only be described as the most bizarre government cover-up in history, because it is a cover-up that played out pretty much in the public's eye, or ear for that matter. And because I honestly have no better way to say it, it's literally and figuratively a cover-up of a hole, Mel's hole. Yes, I know how it sounds. YouTube is gonna ban me for this one day. Nothing new. Now, let us dive right into it. The legend of the bottomless hole began on a late-night radio talk show called Coast to Coast AM. This show had a reputation of featuring bizarre and unusual stories, many of which involved aliens and conspiracies. But not this one. On February 21st, 1997, a mysterious guest came on the Coast to Coast AM show. A man who identified himself as Mel Waters. Mel claimed that he had discovered a bottomless hole on his property near Ellensburg, Washington. Specifically, it was a place called Manastash. He had purchased the property only a few years before, and the previous owners of this same land knew about the hole and had owned it for over 30 years.
Well, the hole has always been there. We've been out there for a couple of years now, and the hole has been there since we've been there. It's been there since the previous owner was there, and the previous owner there was quite elderly. He was there for a good 30, 40 years before we moved in.
Wow.
I know, not the kind of hole you were expecting, but don't go just yet, because it will only get weirder from here. The hole that Mel found on his property had a diameter of 9.5 feet and was surrounded by a 3-foot stone retaining wall. It was about 15 feet deep and bore through dirt and bedrock, extending pretty much into the abyss of an infinite darkness. According to Mel, no one he had ever met could remember a time when the hole was not there. The hole was a familiar sight for the neighbors who would just use it as a makeshift landfill, but the hole never filled up, oddly enough, despite years of dumping pretty much everything. Mel stated that the water in the area was still perfectly safe to drink, the hole didn't fill up, the pit appeared to be endless, with no indication of a bottom. Even with a flashlight, Mel couldn't see the end of it. If anything was dropped into the pit, there was also no sound of item hitting the ground. The most bizarre thing is that when Mel shouted into the hole, there was also no echo, which added to his belief that the pit had no bottom at all. The hole also seemed to have a strange effect on animals. Mel's dog, who were usually very loyal and obedient, would never approach it. They would pretty much dig their paws into the ground and resist with all their might when he tried to pull them towards the hole. And this behavior was not limited to Mel's dogs, as other pets in the area or other animals also avoided the hole like fire. You know why? Because they sense that it's a Satan's hole, and also doggas are smarter than humans. Listen to doggas, goddammit. Okay, I'm good. Okay, so one of Mel's neighbors told him a strange story. The neighbor was a hunter who had thrown his dead dog into the pit. Later, he saw the same exact dog with the same color running through the woods as though it were chasing a game animal. The hunter tried calling out to the dog, but the dog completely ignored him.
Yeah, this could be an apocryphal story, but one guy claims that he threw his departed canine down into the hole.
Oh, really?
And he swears, well, the story is the guy that did it swears the dog actually came back to him. and he was a
Really?
hunter.
Mel couldn't resist his urge to uncover the secrets of the bottomless pit, and so he came up with an ingenious plan to test for water in the pit. He tied a roll of lifesaver candy to the end of a fishing line, and then he lowered it into the hole and left it there long enough to dissolve in the theoretical water. So the candy has to dissolve in water. When he reeled the line back up, the candy was still intact, which was basically indicating that there was no water at a depth of 1,500 feet. So Mel decided to conduct another experiment to explore the pit further. Because Mel is a very stubborn individual and ignores the fact that it might just be a gate to hell, aka Satan's hole. Because, I mean, yeah, why not? Satan's hole. He lowered a 1-pound lead weight down the pit, and when he ran out of line, he simply tied on another spool and continued lowering the weight. And he kept doing this until he used up to an incredible 80,000 feet of fishing line, which is more than 15 miles worth of line. 15 miles worth of line. It was still going. It wasn't the end. The hole did not seem like it had any bottom. Mel revealed that mysterious things were happening around the hole and more bizarre things about the hole. When he placed a portable radio near the hole, it would suddenly play old music and radio programs that hadn't been on air for decades. And in addition, he found a World War II era P-38 Nazi pistol in the vicinity. Strangely, when Mel fired the gun didn't make any sound. Then, Mel found something else near the hole that was even more bizarre. It was a traditional Chinese lucky money envelope. So these little red envelopes that Chinese people use to give money to friends and family during Chinese New Year's. When Mel opened this red envelope, he discovered several Roosevelt dimes. Upon closer examination, he discovered that the dimes were minted in 1943, which was surprising because Roosevelt dimes were not introduced until 1946. And additionally, he found a B mark on the coins, which normally indicated the city of mintage. However, there had been no city in the US with a B initial that had ever minted currency. Mel decided to put the dimes to good use by fashioning homemade bell buckles out of them. A few people came up with a strange explanation regarding the dimes. They hypothesized that Roosevelt dimes came from an alternate reality in which the Nazis won World War II and Roosevelt perished before 1943, and a mint in Berlin made the new dime, resulting in a dime with a B mark. For a while, the story of Mel's hole created a buzz. The idea that there was some kind of mysterious hole that possibly led to an alternate dimension with a parallel timeline seemed incredible. However, the story was soon somewhat forgotten along with the other crazy stories that were featured in the Coast to Coast AM radio show that is not until several years later. In 2002, Mel Waters suddenly returned as a guest on the Coast to Coast AM show. During the interview, Mel said, back in 1997, a day after he first appeared on the Coast to Coast AM show, as he went back to his property, he was met with a group of uniformed people who blocked him from entering. Here comes the man in black, Galaxy, DMCA, or just, Galaxy Defenders, or just there to fill Mel's hole. They claimed that a plane had crashed on Mel's land and that he couldn't enter until the wreckage was cleared. But Mel was skeptical because he saw no smoke or any signs of any plane crashing or any kind of accident happening in the area of that caliber. What happened next will send chills down your spine. The uniformed people warned Mel that, hey, we could just easily find a drug lab on your property if you don't turn around. So when Mel resisted and said that he would tell the media about this, the uniformed agents even went so far as to offer him a deal. Lease the property to the uniformed people for a whopping $250,000 per month, which is staggering $3 million per year. So he was in a difficult position. He didn't want to lose his property technically, but he also didn't want to get caught up in any illegal activity. However, he eventually accepted the deal and the uniformed people took over the property. So Mel was offered to relocate to Australia with the help of whoever they were. And the host of the Coast to Coast AM show, Art Bell, confirmed this relocation, basically, that Mel contacted him from Australia, and they let him bring his dogs and some of his plants with him to Australia, which is completely sidestepping regulations. They paid him, as promised, regularly and on time every month between March of 1997 and December of 1999. Mel's life in Australia may seem perfect, but there are still many unanswered questions about his relocation and the people behind it. Like, who were they that helped Mel relocate and what was their motive? So despite receiving very, very specific instructions by the uniformed people, the men in black, to stay away from the United States, in 1999, Mel decided to return to the US to visit family and make another appearance on Coast to Coast AM. But his return was anything but pleasant. Immediately when he returned, the government served him legal papers claiming that he was in violation of building codes on his property, and before he knew it, his land was seized. Things only got worse for Mel from that point. After helping his nephew move, he boarded a bus headed for Olympia, but an altercation on the bus caught the attention of the police. They asked Mel to give a statement, but he refused, insisting that he had to get back to Olympia. And the police then offered him a ride in their van, and that was the last thing Mel remembered. Yep, complete blackout. And then get this, he wakes up 12 days later. He wakes up in an alley in San Francisco. And it turns out that Mel has been brutally beaten and his back molar teeth were missing. And then there was an IV scar on his arm, and residue of surgical tape suggested that he had been drugged. His wallet and homemade bell buckles, the ones which contained the mysterious 1943 Roosevelt dimes, were gone. Mel, my boy, I think it's time to let them fill the hole. God, my brain! Oh my God, my brain just processed how it sounded. Yep, YouTube is gonna ban me. Wait, sleepwalking in another level. No. This was definitely more than that. Okay, let me get back to this story. So, up to this point, Mel Waters was saying a lot of things that were really crazy and straight up out of a movie, pretty much. And both the host, Art Bell, and the audience were a little bit skeptical. After all, Mel didn't provide any evidence for anything thus far, and everyone just had to take Mel's word as the truth. However, Mel then made a shocking revelation that left everyone stunned. Mel asked Art if he knew about the thing called TerraServer, a database of public domain aerial and satellite imagery. This database became available online 8 months after Mel's first radio appearance in 1997. So Mel claimed that his former property had been blotted out or deleted from public domain imagery on the TerraServer. Remember, this revelation was made on the air in the year of 2002, which is before Google Earth was even a thing. After a commercial break, Art's listeners dug deeper and found a satellite image that corroborated what Mel has been saying. So this is the image, and the image showed that Mel's former property had indeed been wiped out from public view. This discovery sent shockwaves through the radio station, and it definitely seemed like some secret government agency was hiding some kind of operation on Mel's land. The radio show host Art Bell even revealed that a TV camera crew visited the Ellensburg area and discovered significant evidence of the military's presence there in the area. So Mel was fairly convinced that some kind of covert operation was obviously happening on his former property, and he tells the audience that one of his friends, who is a trucker in the same area, apparently had delivered a massive quantity of fiber optic equipment to a warehouse in Ellensburg. And if that's not enough, another trucker claimed to have delivered large crated instruments from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in San Francisco to that very same warehouse in Ellensburg. And San Francisco, doesn't that ring a bell? Do you remember what I said just now about Mel being abducted and waking up beaten and missing his teeth, and he woke up in an alleyway in San Francisco? Mel wasn't entirely sure if it was related, but just in case, he felt like he had to report it. But wait, because there is so much more. As the discussion continues, Mel drops another bombshell. After speaking with several people at a nearby truck stop, he learned that they had witnessed an unusual occurrence: a black beam of anti-light shooting up into the sky from the exact location of the mysterious hole. Was this black beam coming from some other dimension in the hole, or were the government agents performing some kind of experiment? Since Mel no longer had access to his property, he would never know the truth behind these mysteries. Since Mel was kicked out of his property, he wasn't exactly idle. He had been busy with a new investigation. Because you see, Mel Waters gained some unexpected attention from a group of Native Americans in Nevada after appearing on the Coast to Coast AM show. And they reached out to him by email and revealed to him something shocking: that they had another bottomless hole in Nevada, one that was similar to Mel's hole in Washington, and they needed Mel's help. The Native Americans invited Mel to visit them, so Mel traveled to Nevada in September of 2001. They then took Mel to a site on public land where Basque families had settled and showed him the second hole in the middle of the village. The Basques are a small ethnic group originating from Europe. They had been raising sheep in Nevada since the 1800s, and the Basques living there in that area claimed that the hole had been there at least as long as they have. So at least a little over 200 years. They even believed it to be a sacred place. So this hole in Nevada was just as bizarre as Mel's hole in Washington. This hole also measures 9 feet wide, but instead of a stone retaining wall, it has this metal collar that extends down as far as the eye can see. The metal rim produces an unusual warmth around it, but not like the heat we're used to. Strangely enough, just like in the Mel's hole, this new hole also cancels out any sound made directly above it, and even if you hit the metal rim, it also doesn't make a single noise. And just like Mel's hole, animals would just avoid it, and witnesses claim to have seen a black beam emanating from the hole, just like the one that people had reported seeing around Mel's hole. And the similarities didn't stop there, because the Basque villagers found an object near their hole which Mel was very, very familiar with: a Chinese red envelope with 1943 Roosevelt dimes stuffed inside, exactly the same as the one found near Mel's hole in Washington. Mel couldn't explain it, but he felt that there was definitely a strong connection between these two holes. Mel and the Basque villagers weren't content with just observing the hole's strangeness. They decided to take it a step further and conduct experiments. Because of course they did. No one is thinking about it being a portal to hell. I don't know, what are these people thinking? So their first test involved lowering a bucket of store-bought ice down the hole's 1,500-foot depth while simultaneously keeping a control bucket of ice on the surface. They waited until the control ice was halfway melted before retrieving the pit ice and comparing the two. The ice from the hole did not melt. Even stranger, the ice remained solid and actually lukewarm even when Mel held it in his hands. Totally not radioactive, and I am likely thinking what everyone else is thinking. Why are you touching radioactive ice with bare hands? So they were determined to see what would happen, and they tried to melt the ice by cooking it over a fire pit. But the ice caught fire instead of melting. and the flame produced was heat generating, but not like any other flame. It was more like a flickering light, and the ice bucket kept burning for months. And according to Mel, it would still be burning now as he recounted the story. So one of the guys even took some of the burning ice home and used it in his stove, keeping his cabin warm in the winter. Sure, nothing unsafe about this. So the team repeated the experiment multiple times, but the results were mixed, only succeeding 1/3 of the time. So sometimes you create nuclear ice ready to set ablaze and explode, and sometimes you don't. I guess you win some and you lose some. In the spirit of true scientific curiosity, or stupidity, I don't know, one of the Basques suggested they lower a living being into the pit. Mel and the others were hesitant, and rightfully so, especially after what happened with the ice, but the Basques were determined to see what would happen, so they hatched a plan to lower a sheep into the pit. However, the sheep was not having it, and it kicked, it screamed and panicked like all animals do when they sense danger, because that's what happens when you get close to a radioactive hole. So, sheep being about to be lowered into the radioactive pit, and the sheep was panicking, and the sheep did not want to go into the radioactive pit. The sheep fought so hard that it disrupted the Basques' plan, but they were determined to continue. So they basically stunned the sheep by knocking it between the ice, and they put it in a crate with a cable attached to lower it into the hole. Just before reaching the hole, the sheep came to and went completely wild inside the crate, sensing the danger ahead. As the crate was positioned over the pit, the sheep inside was thrashing around violently, but once it was directly over the hole, all sound ceased. So the Basque villagers lowered the crate down, and halfway through, the sheep stopped moving. At the bottom of the hole, 1,500 feet down, Mel and the villagers felt a strange vibration in the metal rim. After leaving the sheep for half an hour, they began to hoist it back up, but it didn't move anymore. The outside of the box was normal, but upon opening it, they found that the sheep was dead. So the sheep died despite showing no signs of trauma. But did they respect the sheep's carcass? Did they give it a proper burial for the heroism of the sheep? No, they did not. They decided to dissect the animal on a nearby table to see what was going on inside. Oh my god. Okay. So inside the sheep, there was a large, pulsating tumor with a strange gel-like substance surrounding it. Was there even one single rational person in this entourage, someone who would raise their hands and be like, hey, guys, maybe let's not touch the radioactive sheep, and certainly let's not dissect the carcass of a radioactive sheep or touch the radioactive tumor. Now, how about that? No? Okay, then. That is not the weirdest part. And honestly, nothing can prepare you for this part of the story. When the villagers removed the tumor, they found something that looked pretty much like an 18-inch long cross between a fetus and a seal, complete with flippers. And to top it all off, it had human-like eyes. The creature seemed to be alive and connected to the tumor with an umbilical cord. It observed the humans around it with reverence, and when it disconnected itself from the cord, Mel felt like he was in the presence of a miracle. But when one of the Basques suggested killing it, they decided not to. Instead, Mel picked up the creature and placed it on the ground. The goo left on his hands actually smelled like ozone. As the creature laid on its belly, it looked up at the humans surrounding it. It was basically studying each of them as though it had intelligence. And they stood there for 2 hours, transfixed by this bizarre creature. Afterwards, the creature seemed like it wanted to go back towards the hole, so Mel felt an overwhelming urge to help it to the top of the metal rim. With trembling hands, Mel reached out to lift the creature, which gave the man a slow nod before plunging back into the hole. Mel and the villagers were left standing there, emotionally drained and deeply moved by this whole experience. Can we just pause and imagine this situation? The whole group standing around this human seal crossbreed creature. Everyone's just so mesmerized and just so touched by this, for the lack of a better word, magic seal. Was there really no one, not one person in that group freaking the fuck out? Because I don't know. I would be what the shit? Can we establish one thing? Are you people seeing what I'm seeing? It's a mutated magic seal that was born from a tumor in a sheep that was lowered into some radioactive hole. Can we please acknowledge the gravity of the situation? Can we address the seal in the room? Why are you guys not freaking out? This isn't normal. And then when everyone was just low-key passing around the seal in their bare hands, I don't know, if I were there, that would set me off. I would be why are you touching it? For all we know, this is some radioactive creature, probably covered and filled with uranium, plutonium, radium, polonium, or whatever the fuck else it's made of it, and you made a conscious decision to pet it like a golden doodle. Do you know what happens to people who handle radium and polonium? Ask Maria Skłodowska-Curie. Oh wait, you can't. You know why? Because she died of exposure to radiation. Okay, now I'm done. Inhale, exhale. I'm good now. I can't say that about my blood pressure, but I'm good. So what in the heck was this human seal hybrid thing? Was it an alien or some kind of being from another parallel universe? Mel actually didn't know, but one thing he knew for sure was that the seal creature had supernatural powers. Because, you see, just before going to Nevada in August, Mel had apparently been diagnosed with cancer and given only 6 months to live. But upon returning home from Nevada, he found out that the cancer was completely gone. And Mel believed that the seal creature he encountered in the hole had somehow healed him. Okay, never mind. The magic seal heals cancer. I would hold it. If I had to, if I were diagnosed with cancer, give me a magic seal. Okay, so in December of 2002, Mel Waters appeared again on Coast to Coast AM for an interesting update that involved the appearance of a third hole. Except this time, this new hole was being created right before everyone's eyes. So remember that earlier Mel and the Basque villagers had found some burning ice, and one of the villagers had put the burning ice in his stove to use as a heating for his cabin. For a while, everything seemed fine, but soon the villager noticed some strange things happening in his home. He always felt thirsty, the air was super dry, and even his skin started to dry out. And to humidify the air, he would actually place a kettle of water on top of the stove, but one day he noticed that the steam was being absorbed by the stove. And eventually the stove crashed through the hearth and floorboards of his cabin and sunk a foot into the ground below. And a few weeks later, the villager's house shockingly has become reduced to dry wood dust, and the stove continued to sink into the ground, creating a 5-foot hole in the ground with a smooth surface. A smooth wall surface, just like Mel's hole and the Basque hole in Nevada. It was almost as if the burning fire created a totally new hole. So the villager contacts Mel with his eerie story, and Mel doesn't know what else to do. So out of desperation, he contacts the shady uniformed people, men in black, from before, and the ones who had seized his property and sent him to Australia. The secret government agents acted quickly and sent in a whole crew with heavy-duty construction equipment in order to deal with this burning ice that was creating this new hole. They attempted to use cranes to extract the stove and its contents, but to their surprise, the stove was too heavy for even the cranes to lift up. Eventually, they were only able to lift up the stove using multiple cranes. The stove was loaded onto an enormous truck and taken away from the site. Mel Waters had received some new information about the Basques, and it's not for the faint of heart. Apparently, the alien seal actually came out of the hole multiple times to visit the Basque villagers. And get this, the Basques managed to find a way to communicate with the magic seal. That's right, they are chatting up with the interdimensional or possibly interdimensional radioactive being. but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So the creature has some dire warnings about the burning ice. According to the Basques, the creature spoke to them through a boombox. But here's what they were able to decipher. The burning ice, quote, can and would, end quote, destroy the earth in a very short amount of time if it's not used properly. The creature also warned that there are intelligent beings on the other worlds who anticipate that the human race will destroy itself through nuclear war, and they plan to move in and use the burning ice once we're done. And if history has taught us anything, it's that when the burning ice is discovered in the universe, it's almost always improperly used. Listen to the magic seal. It cured cancer, okay? Listen to the magic seal. Okay, so unfortunately, despite all of these bombshell reveals, this 2002 interview would be the last time we would ever hear from Mel Waters. So the question remains, is Mel's Hole real? Well, let's first look at the evidence supporting Mel Waters' story. So the most compelling piece of evidence was the Terra server image, where the area of Mel's property is basically blotted out. This was in fact legitimate, and that area was in fact missing in the Terra server data. Some people argue that Mel could have checked the Terra server first to find which part of the map had a blocked area. Then he would say that that was where he found the hole. However, Terra server service launched several months after Mel first appeared on the Coast to Coast AM radio show, so he couldn't have faked it anyway. So another supporting evidence are some individuals who allegedly can corroborate Mel Waters' story. And one man who claimed to have visited the Mel's Hole multiple times was a man named Red Elk, who described himself as an, quote, intertribal medicine man, half-breed Native American and white, end quote. Red Elk said he first visited the hole in 1961 when his father took him to an apparently bottomless hole near Ellensburg to dump garbage, and he had returned to the hole many times after that. Red Elk also claimed that the US government maintained a top-secret base at Mel's Hole and said that there was a lot of alien activity there. Many of the details that Red Elk mentioned about this mysterious hole basically matched up the hole that Mel Waters was talking about. However, in 2002, Red Elk led an expedition of 30 people to find the hole, but surprise, surprise, he was unable to locate it. And in terms of evidence, well, that's really all there is to it. In fact, there is a lot more evidence that Mel's Hole probably doesn't exist. For one, when news reporters looked into the story of Mel's Hole, they found something weird. There were no public records indicating that anyone by the name of Mel Waters had ever lived in or owned the property in that area. Of course, you could say that Mel Waters was probably a fake name used to preserve his identity, but if that's truly the case, how were the authorities supposedly able to find Mel Waters and track him down? This was late 90s, early 2000s. This was 1997. Also, why did Mel Waters need to continue using his fake name even after he had already been in contact with the mysterious authorities? And perhaps the biggest problem with Mel Waters' story is, why wasn't there any photo evidence? Unlike some supernatural stories I've talked about on this channel, where the events happened back when cameras were not widely available to everyone, the story of Mel's Hole happens in the late 90s to early 2000s. And it should be super easy and affordable to take multiple photo evidence. However, when Mel is asked for photo evidence, he would conveniently say that he forgot to take a picture, or sometimes he would say that he simply wasn't able to take a picture. And remember those 1943 Roosevelt dimes, which Mel found near both holes in Washington and Nevada? So apparently, he said that the dime actually disappears from view at 15 feet away, and when he tried to take a photo of it, the dime simply wouldn't appear on the film or any digital image. And remember the magic seal creature? I mean, who would forget? It cures cancer and warns us about radioactive ice. So of course, there aren't any pictures of the seal. But Mel says that the Basque villagers tried to record its voice while they were having a dialogue with it. But not surprisingly, all they got in the recordings were a bunch of random noises and pulsating tones. So regarding the existence of Mel's Hole, there have been experts who have come out to debunk Mel Waters' claims. One such expert was Jack Powell, a geologist who worked for the Department of Natural Resources. So Jack Powell actually grew up in the valley, like the Kittitas Valley, in the same area as where Mel's Hole supposedly is located. When he was a child, Jack Powell would play around on old gold mine shaft located in a field northwest of Ellensburg. The shaft went downwards at an angle and resembled a very deep hole. And then in March 2012, Jack Powell actually took several people to this location and took these photos as evidence. As you can see, the many features of this mine shaft definitely resembled Mel's Hole. However, unlike Mel Waters' description of the bottomless hole, this hole was likely only 90 feet deep, and even when it was an active mine, it might have only been 300 feet deep at the most. Jack Powell believes that this mine shaft may have been the inspiration for the urban legend of Mel's Hole. And believers of Mel's Hole would counter that perhaps the location of Mel's Hole was wrong and that it is located somewhere else entirely. And to this, Jack Powell reasons that, in his expert opinion, Mel's Hole is geologically impossible because a hole of that depth would collapse into itself under tremendous pressure and heat from the surrounding strata. He also argues that the deepest mine shaft in the world was 12,672 feet deep, and the deepest known cavern was 7,188 feet deep. And the deepest man-made hole at that point was made by the Russians in 1989, and it was only 40,230 feet. And so this is the mystery of Mel's Hole. Endless pit with magic cancer-treating radioactive seals and nuclear ice coming out of it. Sure, it sounds like a crazy story and honestly some kind of prank, but then again, Mel going on Coast to Coast AM and making updates throughout the years does make it sound serious and kind of very real. If the hole wasn't anything special, why would the government be so interested in it in the first place? Why block out the satellite view of that particular area? These are just a few of the many questions that anyone who hears this story might ask, but will we ever get an answer? Likely not, unless a magic seal pops in to warn us again. Thanks for watching till the end. If you like this video, I have weekly live streams where I cover mysteries, true crime cases, conspiracy theories, and on occasion Mothman's butt. Okay, I swear it's not an unhealthy obsession. Okay, maybe a little. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe to the channel on your way out. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in my next stream. Bye!